everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's me, Diana.
Hey, it's me, Jackie.
Woo, that was cool.
And hi, it's Alan. No musical interlude.
Well, folks, you might be saying, wait, with you is always Alan. He's not always there. He's only there for when he's a special guest or when they're doing a book club. And if you read the title of the episode, you already know this is a book club episode. And this is a Supervision September Book Club episode. So for new listeners or folks who don't know the way we set up things here, we usually do our book clubs on our Patreon feed, and then we release them, after like a year or so to the main feed. So you've probably seen a couple of them. But for Supervision September, we go all out, and we do a whole book about supervision that goes free and available to everyone to listen to right when it is released. So if you are a patron, you're able to get 2 CEs for listening to this, 2 Supervision CEs, I should say, for no additional charge as a thanks for being a patron. If you're just listening to this on the free feed, you can get your Supervision CEs like normal. You just go to the site and you click it and all that stuff. But might be a good time to check out patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, just saying. But in any case,
this episode is still a gift to our listeners because you're getting not just 1 hour of content, but more than 1 hour of content this week.
Like 2-ish, almost 2-ish.
Yes.
Whatever the requirement is. I know what it is, but yeah, it's hour and 40
minutes.
Yeah, hour and 40 minutes or more. Usually we do 2 just because it's easier to remember those numbers. But it'll be over 140, you know that, because it's a book club. But anyway, that's a lot of preamble for us to say that we are going to be talking about a supervision book, and it is going to be Results by Dr. John Austin. And
brand new book.
And that's why we chose it, because A, it was brand new, and we've never done a book club in which we talked about a book that has released I guess Between Now and Dreams was pretty recent.
Yeah.
So never mind. This is the second time we've done a book within about a year of its publication. So a recent book. But if folks had either been, subscribing to Dr. Austin's newsletter, or they might have seen sort of in the various, social feeds and whatnot, this book was available for a while as a free, not PDF, but free ebook version. So we said we should probably look at this book because it's one that a lot of people may have downloaded at some point and may then not have gotten around to reading. So it may be one that is easily accessible for a lot of people. And we thought, let's talk about it. And if folks want to hear more about it, it may still be, I don't believe it was still free, but you can still get an ebook. I believe you can get the audiobook for free as well. So if you just want to listen to the book and to the discussion about the book, there you go. But it seemed like it made sense to do it. So here we are, talking about Results by Dr. John Austin. Jackie actually has the full paperback version. Jackie, what is the full subtitle? I don't have it in my notes here. I have it on.
I have it because I try to limit my screen time. And so I bought the actual book. So I didn't get it for free, but there is a free audio book inside the actual book, which is funny. So it's called Results. A simple 5-step process, the science-based approach to better productivity, profitability, and safety. And on the cover, there's like little trees. So it's like a little tree and a bigger tree. And then there are leaves, but it never actually gets that big. I wonder why they didn't choose like a big tree.
Like a redwood, you're going to get results.
Yeah, it's just a little bit bigger than the other one.
And just to confirm for folks, we did not get free copies because Dr. Austin sent us free copies. We got free copies because everyone who was subscribed to Dr. Austin's newsletter at reachingresults.com was able to access a free ebook version of the book. That was something that was not specifically for ABA Inside Track.
Right. And I bought mine on Amazon.
And you bought yours anyway.
So the back, I like the back because I always like to read the back, and you guys don't get to read the back. Do you wish you could create an amazing environment where your team can do their best and feel safe, connected, and valued? You can transform your leadership with these 5 easy steps. If you want to do those, buy this book today. Your team and your business will thank you for it. Ooh.
Oh, all right. Well, let's see. Let's see if we think the team and business will thank us for having read this and discussed it. So why don't we start off? Usually we start off with our book clubs with kind of some general thoughts on the book itself. So I will say it is a very quick read. I read it during my son's baseball tournament. So I got to read outside with my little e-reader. And so it was a very pleasant reading experience in that regard.
I read mine on a plane to Seattle. Some things I like about the book. After every chapter, there are some worksheets, which, man, do I love a good worksheet. So if you are planning to take this book, buy it or get it for free, and then go through the 5-step process in your own time, which he recommends, the worksheets are really helpful because they give you time to review what you've learned in the last chapter and also to then move forward in the steps, right? So I love that. They give you some like thought questions in the first chapter, and then you have review and a reflection section in each of them. So I really like that. I think that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's a very doing oriented book.
Yes.
Which we don't always read doing oriented, but sometimes we read books that are not as active in terms of now that you've read this, now you should XYZ. And this book very much is about think about something while you're reading it and then write down the notes as you're going through it.
Yeah, doing it. I also liked there was a lot of examples in the book. So sometimes books will talk about things but then not give examples. There was a ton of examples, maybe too many examples in the book, but at least there was enough examples. And then the one thing I liked but found quirky in a way is the placement of quotes. So there will there'd be like writing, just a quote on the bottom of the page, writing, just a quote in the middle of the page. And I never understood how the quotes, although I loved all of them, tied into the book. So that part I found quirky, fun, but I'm wondering what the rationale was for that, because it's like they're not on every page. They're not even at the end of, like, it doesn't seem like there's a rhyme or reason, but I'm sure there is.
It's like in a magazine article. Will there be like a little like excerpted part that's a quote in like big font?
Yeah.
For those people who still subscribe to magazines.
Right, but some of the quotes weren't even from the book. Right? They were like, Peter Drucker, one cannot hire a hand. The whole person always has to come with it. Like, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like Between Now and Dreams too, because they had a quote that was like an inspiration for the chapter at the beginning of each chapter. So it's a little bit like that, except they were like just peppered throughout.
They were peppered throughout. So I'm wondering, like, who decided where the quotes were going to go? That was interesting for me. Yeah. Quirky but fun, but weird.
Okay. Alan, how about you? What were some kind of your initial thoughts after finishing the book?
I think it would be a great introduction to some of these topics if you were like an undergraduate or just starting graduate school, or if you're, I guess if you wanted a précis for like how you're going to start your team and leadership and just wanted a nice, concise set of like activities to do to like get your head wrapped around leading a team. Yeah, I mean, I think he definitely followed his advice at the beginning of making it simple because it is very straightforward. I think the worksheets that Jackie likes, that's a very behavioral principle of like the guided notes of like as you read, you process it with some structure. So that's something I learned as a good like behaviorism tool back in the day. Yeah, so it was very A, B, C, D. Some of the anecdotes and examples. It's always nice to see that. And yeah, I mean, it wasn't an awful book, wasn't my favorite, but I'm in a different place in my behavioral learning than someone that's the target audience for this, I would say. This could have been very helpful when I was first learning, especially to apply the science of human behavior in that like organizational framework.
Yeah, I totally hear you there, Alan. It did. It was both a pro and a con, how sort of straightforward a lot of it is. And it's always hard, I think, when we do these book club discussions of we're all in very specific points in our own careers. And if this were a book that were only for businesses, so only people who are down at the Sprocket factory, I would understand why that might be the case, why, it's the jargon's simplified and why there aren't as many, here's a behavioral principle. I want to make sure you understand all the details and science behind it. Although this book does not shy away from using behavioral principles. But some of the examples are very specifically about ABA companies. And I wasn't really sure, are these ABA companies that Dr. Austin's thinking of from his personal experience that are ABA companies run by business people who don't understand what ABA actually entails? Or is he thinking of the BCBA who decided, you know what, I'm starting my own ABA company, who would hopefully know some of these principles already, though may not. So I never want to get too down on a book for like, this book's too easy. And if you already know basic supervision, don't bother, because I don't know how much any one person knows about a given topic. I know for me, if someone had recommended, hey, Rob, I know you guys talk about supervision on your podcast. I bet you'll love results. It'll teach you a lot of things you don't know. I would be mad at that person for having recommended this book to me. It didn't take too long to read, so I guess I couldn't be too mad, but I'd say there wasn't too much new in here, other than maybe some of the examples, some of the presentation, which is always kind of fun to see how different practitioners share the same types of information. But again, a lot of the topics, even some of the examples, I've seen Dr. Austin speak about, say, at like Babbitt a number of years ago. So there was a sense of, yeah, okay, yep, knew that, okay, heard that before. But again, I don't know where any one person is. So I totally hear you. If you've never heard of supervision, or you are a BCBA and you are thinking about doing supervision, or you've suddenly found yourself in a manager role, I think this book could be a real great, easy pick up and learn a little bit about some steps you could take. And especially some of the sections on safety and psychological safety and really building the context and the environment. And Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, he could read this book really easily. It's quick, he could learn a lot about it, and the way Dr. Austin speaks about business people, you get the sense that tons of them are still, I'm Don Draper and I'm a tough old man from the 60s and feelings don't have space here. And if I say it once, you should know it forever. And if you didn't predict what I wanted, that's your problem. And I'm going to go drink whiskey.
So I wonder if it might be helpful to step back and ask who he wrote the book for. Mm-hmm. Right? Because if it's a business person, because he doesn't say like ABA, right?
Yeah.
There says nothing about ABA in the back of the
business
book.
Leaders. This is his business leadership class in in truncated book form, as he brings up in the not the preface, but in the first chapter.
Right. So I don't think this was written for BCBAs. I think this was written for the general public that doesn't have a grasp on ABA principles, right? And so then if you think about it that way, you'd want it to be simple. You'd want it to be straightforward. You'd want to have a lot of examples, right? So how he's not writing it for us, right? It'd probably be much more technical if he was writing it for us.
He's not writing it for us, because you could be a BCBA who is also now a leader or manager. But I hear your point, though, Jackie. Right. We're not necessarily, as practitioners or professors, the target audience.
Right. And so then I also wonder, when I was reading it, I lost my thought. It was there, and now it's gone.
If I just may interject to echo that, you point out like there's quotes from like someone like Peter Drucker. I, back in the day when I was studying library science, had to read some Peter Drucker, and Peter Drucker was like a very charismatic and had all these big ideas, but it wasn't always didn't feel practical always.
Yep.
It was always we should have these moral objectives that we make decisions on, but how do you do it? This book feels very much the flip of that, of just this is what leadership is like. These are the kind of decisions you probably have to make or should be making. Worksheet to do that.
Yeah. And I remember what I was going to say now. I'm so glad, because I was like, oh no, the world is setting in, right? When you forget.
This better be the best point ever, Jackie. I've been waiting for it.
Well, I want to counteract your point by saying that managers say, I told them to do it, and then they just didn't do it. That still happens in behavior analytic agencies. That still happens with people I supervise, right? That still happens in consultation scenarios where people are not using behavioral skills training, right? Even though we know it's the most effective, what's easier is I'm going to maybe tell you, I'm going to send you an email, I'm going to give you a treatment plan, and then I just expect you to follow it. Right. Yeah. So I think that is sadly still the norm on how leaders are trying to supervise their staff, just for multiple reasons, not because they're a bad supervisor, but time, resources, right? Energy, multitude of people that they're supervising. I don't think it's that they don't care, but they're okay, this is BST is a lot, and do I have to do it for every little thing? Yeah, probably you should, right? But so I think that in that sense, there are some chapters that if it was legal to do, pulling out some of the chapters, maybe not having a BCBA read the whole book, but some of those chapters actually would be helpful for even veteran BCBAs who may have forgotten that just telling someone what to do, even though you're the best, doesn't mean that they're going to do it.
Yeah, and I don't think, given I did have some, there similar to kind of like talking about the quotes, there were definitely parts of the book that I felt like as a reader who has a decent understanding of all of the concepts here, wish had been in a different order. And I'm not quite sure. Like sometimes you ask yourself that and you say, well, I understand it's in this order because not everyone's going to be, the me reading this book. Someone who I kind of understand these principles. I've read a number of other supervision books. I've read other OBM books, but some of the tone of the beginning really talking about setting the soil. And then the end of the book is here's how to set the soil, where it felt like, well, shouldn't this have been like the second chapter of the book? Because you told me your 5 points. And then you give me a whole chapter on, but all these things need to be in place. And I kind of feel like, which is it? I need to have these things in place and then magic's going to happen, or I need to follow these 5 points, but it won't work without the soil, being tilled or present with, my psychological safety and my, openness of communication. And so some of those things felt like I don't know no matter who you are reading this book, this felt like it was not the right order.
I wrote it too. I wrote it should be chapter 1, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4.
But then some of it too was, I think some of the things that you would need to do to set yourself up for success in creating the soil, you'd also have needed an understanding of the 5-point
Right. That's
plan.
probably what happened.
So it sort of feels like you should read this book once with the idea that the only person who's going to use this is you because you're a terrible leader. Then you do all the stuff in chapter 8. Then you go back and say, joke, you could use this 5-point plan with everyone else in your organization. So maybe that's why it's another reason it's brief, because you have to read it, do it for the last chapter, then come back to the beginning. It's like one of those old video games where you beat the game and they'd be like, just kidding, go back and beat the game again to get the real ending. It is kind of how it was.
That might be right, Rob, because he does say the point that you should be working on yourself first. Right? So do the book on a pinpointed behavior of yours that you're going to work on first. And then once you've gone through the book, set the soil, right? Applying the context of the book for yourself, then you can look at the culture and then do that. Maybe that's what he was thinking.
Well, I read it once and then I read it again or skimmed it again while I took notes. So I feel like I should have gotten the true ending. I did not get the ending. The princess was still in another castle. I'm a little, I want a different end screen. All right, but that was my big beef with the book, is I felt like it would sometimes be simple and sometimes it would refer to things that I should have already done, but then how to do them came later in the book. But there was a sense that it started repeating itself a little by the end, and not even necessarily that it shouldn't have been repeating itself at the end, but in terms of the flow of I need to do this, but before I do that, I need to understand this plan. But before I understand that plan, I need to have done the thing. So that part did leave me a bit confused. I also am not a business owner. I mean, I guess we have the podcast and stuff, but folks know we didn't get into this field and we didn't start doing this to be business people. So when they're talking about results versus all the employees and they're coming up with the examples of the factory, I like those examples, but I also struggle to sort of put all of the principles in place when it's not laid out quite that way. Like I tried to do the worksheets and I felt about halfway through, I'm thinking about this too molecularly. I'm thinking about this as sort of like looking at, small pieces of the problem. I'm having trouble with that big picture. So again, if you're someone who is not, a leader in your organization, you may find some of these principles helpful, but they may not give like the big results. Maybe you're going to get the results on the cover where you only get a couple leaves because you're not the CEO. I don't know.
Yeah, he puts that out there. One thing that I thought was funny is his leadership general approach is called behavioral science for leaders. Mm-hmm. And I skimmed over that. And in the preference, he's like, BSL. I'm like, why is he talking about baseline?
I know, me too.
And then I was like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. That happened to me as well.
Yeah. Dan, what about your opening thoughts?
Well, my opening thoughts are not dissimilar from everyone else's. I think that, I read this book with the intention of like talking about it in this podcast. But I think that you would probably have a different experience if you use the book as a workbook and like a resource tool addressing a specific problem and looking to change your own behavior and therefore then change some type of outcome at your company. I think it would be a different experience of reading the book, and things that, like, when I read it right now, I'm like, yeah, I know all that, right? If I were, really like drilling down and looking at it related to a specific problem that I was having a hard time solving, I think that some of those pieces that I just, in theory say, yeah, I know, I might spend more time thinking through and really seeing the benefit of application of them in that context. So I think that that's the most useful approach for this book, is to come at it in conjunction with a problem that you actually have and want to use this as a workbook tool to solve the problem. And then you can move through some of the chapters probably pretty quickly if you have a background in behavior analysis. But others are going to bring some new perspective. And like, I know we already just said the psychological safety term, like all of us seem to like that and maybe haven't heard that in other places before. That may be a good takeaway piece for folks who already have a background in some of the terminology in this book.
Yeah. Can we talk about chapter 1 for a minute?
Well, don't you want to talk about the preface
Start
first?
at the very beginning.
Okay, we can talk about
I just wanted to say I really liked the preface. I felt like it really captured the why of the book, gave us a little bit of background of Dr. Austin as a person and an author, and I thought it was a really good preface. It really got me ready to read the book. Like, I got where he was coming from. It felt like a real place of wanting to support workers, and the reason he works with leaders is because, well, if you just work with the workers, and the leaders just keep doing whatever they're doing, you're not going to create an environment of meaningful change and therefore getting meaningful results. So really looking at the return of investment of working with leaders, sort of his background in terms of understanding of behavior analysis and then OBM. And, I just it got me ready to read the book, which some prefaces do that really well. Some prefaces are better than the book themselves. Like when you get a guest to write a preface, sometimes that's dangerous because if the preface is better than the book, you just wish you'd stuck with the preface. Like, they summed it up real good. But I thought it got me ready to read, which makes it a good preface. Will the end be as good? I don't know.
the preface.
Let's find out. All right, chapter 1. Chapter 1. Let's talk about chapter 1.
One thing I liked about chapter 1, I liked the reasons why things aren't working. It's on page 23. I could resonate with a lot of the reasons why things aren't working, like expectations being vague, too many processes, things are too complicated, right? Measuring results, but not how you got there, not having any follow-up, having to use threat, and individuals were blamed when things went wrong instead of like procedures or that. And leaders attempted to motivate by procedure and policy. Man, when I read this, I was thinking back some previous workplaces, and I was like, yes. Oh my goodness, that I felt that. So I feel like not as a supervisor, but maybe as a supervisor, but as a person that worked for a long time, starting at 15 years old, I have felt all of these, right, in some form or another, under not so stellar leadership. So that was helpful, right? These are common things that you may notice, and it's as a supervisor you're like, oh yeah, I'm doing these things. It's cool. It happens.
I was a little surprised they didn't talk too much about. I think you get the same results, but when leaders don't want to blame somebody, they are worried about putting blame, even though they know there might be an individual who's not engaging in the correct behaviors to get the required results, that then everyone has to come in for the retraining session. Everyone has to come in and have it be explained why this is important. And I know I've done that too, where I'm like, well, let's do step 1. Let's make sure everyone understands, which may be useful. I mean, it's not like I'm not using some of those principles he talks about, but at the same time, is not necessarily the quickest way to get meaningful results, in that if you're just doing another retraining and explaining, why would this be any different than the last time this group was originally trained? Because some people are already doing what they need to be doing and getting the results they need, and some are not. And if I'm just doing exactly the same thing I did when everyone started, just to make sure, I'm not doing anything, I'm not saving anyone any time. I guess I'm trying to not point out any one person, but there are ways, and the book does go into ways you can get the better results without having to just point to this person's the reason we're getting bad results. You could think about it differently and present it in a way that actually includes the workers more in the discussion, so that if there is any retraining, it's based on feedback and information and data that you have, rather than just let's just try it again and see what happens.
And I would just say, Rob, that also, like, what you're saying definitely makes sense about, like, it's not efficient use of time, but also I would say that his idea of, like, individuals were blamed for things went wrong isn't just saying that, like, that individual reports to somebody. And so if that person is not succeeding, you should also look at who they're being managed by and what their managerial process is. Because if it gets to the point where you have to retrain a whole team because of one person, that means that there's at least one, probably two layers of management that aren't happening because that person's not getting the feedback they're supposed to be getting. So it's easy to say, like, hey, that person's not as underperforming, but why do we all have to, like, be here? Well, it's like, well, because a manager made a decision not to communicate to that person and to engage in that feedback process. So that's kind of how I was taking his idea that, like, individuals get blamed, is that it's like, no, it's like if one person's not performing, it's because they weren't being managed.
Right. And if it's their issue, right? Then you look and see the supervisor is doing things, then it's documented, then you fire them. And he says that. He's like, there may be an issue with supervision, or it may be an individual performance issue. And if it's that, then you fire them and move on because we're still at work. Right? You don't fire yourself at life if you're doing it on yourself, but then you can make changes, right? You're your own supervisor.
Yeah. And sort of like everyone's been saying, I think this chapter did have that focus of creating a meaningful environment, and that did stick throughout the book of using these steps. I think even if you're not using them super well, as long as you're focusing on some of those key principles that are at the end of the book, but that are brought up throughout the rest of the book, you probably aren't doing a ton of harm and are potentially getting closer and closer to meaningfully using the 5-step process. But at the least you're coming at it with a level of, like, curiosity. I think there's definitely a tone in the 5-step process of understanding that everyone has a place in an organization, that everyone is trying to reach meaningful results, and it's just you're missing some steps in between. But I kind of wish it had a little bit of this sprinkled throughout, but a little bit of that crucial conversations. Anyway, now that you've read the book, you probably forgot everything you read. But if you only remember one thing, and I feel like the one thing would be that stop blaming people. Just, like, be curious about, like, everyone, this seems like it's not what we want. Let's think of some ideas to change things, and then write down what you did. Like bare minimum, if you do that, you're kind of getting there. I don't know if you'd actually get great results, but you would get slightly better results if you focused there.
Yeah. I think too, one of the points that they make in a later chapter, but I think is helpful here, is to think about what needs to change. Like, I love this first question, like, list the most important results for you, your team, or your organization here. If you're struggling with this question, because I sat down, I was like, okay, I'm going to use this book. And I was like, what am I struggling with? And then I was like, I'm struggling with answering this question. Right? And then I said, consider what you are accountable for in your job or key results named in your strategic plan. That was helpful for me. Yeah. Right? Because I tried to do this not professionally, but personally. Okay, I'm like, what am I struggling with? What am I accountable for in my personal life? And that kind of helped me, like, move forward with the question. But that was funny because I was like, I sat there and I was like, oh, this is a hard question. And I was like, they already gave me an answer to help me figure it out.
Yeah. Did anyone else try to use the workbook? I tried and felt like I tried to do it professionally and sort of wish I'd done it with something personal, because professionally I felt like I'm not a leader in the sense of, like, in the organization I have higher firepower kind of leader. I'm more just, like, do supervisions and do trainings and I work with a team, but I'm not like, I'm the boss and you have to listen to me. Like, I don't have that say of, like, the direction of the organization.
Same. So that is why I did it personally, because when I thought professionally, like I started thinking about like our department and and like how much say I have, and I have none, right? Basically. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to do it personally because I have a lot of say in what my personal life is, hopefully.
Yeah.
Right?
Alan or Diana, did you use the workbook for anything? Did you have any problems? You were like, John Austin, help me. Take me away.
I did not, just mostly as a matter of time. I wanted to make sure to read the book. I mean, I am in a position where I do have higher firepower and I do some of this. And some of these questions are the questions that I've learned to ask through like performance management courses and everything, which, you know, he does give a nod to several times throughout the book. So it's definitely helpful, especially if you're just coming into using behavioral principles.
Yeah.
I thought about many different ways that I could apply the workbook questions, but I didn't go through the full exercise of doing it. And yeah, you know, like mine and Jackie's jobs are kind of different in that we're not generally supervising employees, and yet we are working with people and have relationships in which we have the power in those relationships, right? And there are many things that I need to be asking those people to do ultimately for their own benefit. So there's a similarity in, you know, power structure, I think, in the roles that I have now. So there were a lot of parallels I saw in the application piece here that I could potentially, you know, utilize this for in the future. I think, you know, we're going to talk about all the pieces, right? But I think for me, you know, laying out what the expectations are is always an area that I have room for improvement, and following up on those, because they're, you know, you want to give people like freedom to explore and experience their graduate school in the way that works for them. And so that's a big piece, I think, related to like compassion and flexibility. And yet there are at the end some permanent products that need to be produced that you just have to like get there. However you get there, you got to get there, right? So like trying to find the balance between that. I thought about that quite a lot while I was reading this book, and how that might tie into, you know, teaching people about procrastination and how to avoid that, setting deadlines for themselves as well as the deadlines that I could enforce for them in various ways. So that was kind of like where my thought process led me.
Go ahead.
I was just because he used an example of like a bedtime routine in here. I was just thinking about if Rob and Diane were to put their like family through this process and think about like what do we need to improve by 15%? Like what metric? Start putting metrics on your family like outcomes.
It would be trash left around the house.
You know what? That's what I should have thought of, because it drives me nuts. And I, as a bad leader, sometimes I do shame, blame, and retrain, and it has not gotten better results. Or has it? I'm not even measuring it, other than sometimes I'm mad at it, sometimes I'm not. So
how do you know that it's been effective if you're not measuring it, Rob? Come on,
you know what?
like
You got me.
You're
You got me.
gonna get results with that kind of approach.
He just uses surveys.
That's why I've stepped down as the head of Perry Cruises Incorporated. I will be spending more time with my family. Wait, no, crap. That's not So if you know what, if you out there were like, this book might help me, I want to get better at communication, I would say of all the things that are talked about in examples, this is probably the closest to, if you read the whole book, you might actually have all the answers you need, because they have so many examples about improving communication in this book. Yeah. You might be able to just take those and just use them without understanding the 5-step process and still find some results.
Communication is all we talk about in chapter 2, basically. So I think we can move on down to chapter 2.
Let's go. Chapter 2, the behavior change process. So that's the example that starts off chapter 2. And then they give you the 5 steps. But do you want to talk about the communication example, Jackie? Or I wasn't sure if that was a segue for that, or
no, it was just a segue to talk about communication, right? It's important to be very clear and set your expectations up. And you're going to learn that sometimes things that you say may be vague, right? And so people may not be doing what you've asked them to do because you haven't actually told them what to do. And so they're like, make sure that You can observe what you want them to do, and then you've told them exactly what you want them to do.
Yeah.
I actually had that recently with an interaction I had as a supervisee of there was just like a term that we were using that I was like, okay, like I understand like what the word means, but what does it mean in this context? They're like, oh, it's these things. I'm like, great. So like, I understand those things. I've just never heard that word applied like overarching as an umbrella term for that. I'm with you. I got it. But like that connection had never been explicitly made. And so I'm just like, it's just a simple miscommunication kind of thing that would have, if I hadn't asked, it would have been a really unproductive like weeks of supervision.
That's true. Yeah. And I think, the example I don't think is super applicable to behavior analytic companies. It's trying to it may be like getting the message out to people, and they found that most of the employees were not receiving the messages from the executives, and so they implemented a phone tree. By the way, if somebody put me in a phone tree, I would be super annoyed.
Well,
right?
Hopefully they would have shared the idea of the phone tree with you at step 3. Agree.
Right, and I would have been like, no.
And then they would have done a PDCHS on you to be like, what's going on with this person? What's the function of this refusal to be on the phone tree?
I know.
So the phone tree was an interesting example that I kind of chewed on a little bit more than I should have.
Me too, Ellen.
I think that it's interesting because it's harder to ignore. Like you're not as likely to ignore someone talking to you on the phone. Like you can get text messages. Yeah. You can get emails. You could even go through Elias trainings on a topic and just be clicking your way through it. But having someone tell you something on the phone or in person just does make a difference. And especially like the one-to-one, like sitting in a large group. Of like, yeah. So, but I'm like, maybe not a phone tree, but like some kind of like, I'm going to talk to someone one-on-one about this just to make sure we get this disseminated.
Kind of going off on thinking about that even more, and then thinking about the 5-step process, which we'll lay out in a minute. Part of it would probably need to be, if someone wanted me to be on a phone tree, they would need to spend the time saying, we have this phone tree. Let's take some few minutes now and put numbers in and names to those numbers so you don't think this is a telemarketer and refuse to answer it, which is, I think, what we are all trained to do. I see a number, it doesn't have a name attached. I'm not picking up. Leave a message if you want me. And then maybe I'll remember to check that message.
And I think one thing to note is it was just senior leaders. It wasn't like middle management and then down. Senior leaders had to call everyone. So that could be effective if you have a smaller company, right? But if you're a senior leader that's in charge of like 50 people, you may need to do some pyramidal training, right? And so the senior leaders call the middle people, and then the middle people call the direct reports, right? So that you're not calling like 100 people, because that's very time inefficient.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the pyramid. Oh, sorry, Diana. I was just saying, I think the pyramidal training is kind of like, it would have been nice if that had been explicitly like tied in, because I think that's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. It's just not like ever said or modeled in this chapter. But yeah, like the idea is that someone knows the information, they pass it along in a smaller, more like communicationally intimate way, rather than just getting barked at or modeled in like a group of 100.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu
regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
Hey everyone, sorry to interrupt the conversation in the middle, but I almost forgot to give you the first of your secret code words. It's just for those who don't know, ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved, and by listening to our show, you're able to get two Supervision CEs. All you need to do is finish listening to the show, then go to abainsidetrack.com or click the link in your podcast player notes section, and you'll be able to get right to that page and put in some key information, including 2 secret code words. I'm going to give you the first of those code words now. It is gremlin, Gremlin. Originally little creatures that were said to, damage planes and machinery back in WW2. But later, we all think of them now as the creepy monsters from the hit 80s comedies, the Gremlins movies. So that code word is gremlin. All right, and back to our book club.
This is an inefficient, if effective, system. Yeah. So, the point here is that we got to find a way to, actually communicate with people so that they hear it, because in the anecdote, they were trying to disseminate information and only 4% of the company said they even received the message. So that's how they ended up moving to this, quote unquote, face-to-face, real-time communication system of the phone tree.
Those people were the eager beavers, right? They're the ones they're we love all the information.
Right, yeah.
See their face.
But it's not an efficient system. And we spent a lot of time on this show talking about trying to develop efficient systems of supervision. So you really have to pick and choose the messages, I think, that get sent if you are looking for this system. And maybe there is some room here in this conversation to think about how to make a system that is effective communication that's also efficient too.
Okay, so chapter 2.
And I don't want to receive phone calls. Don't call me.
Well, it might be part of the solution. You're going to have to. I'm sorry.
I will continue to blissfully ignore everything.
So chapter 2, in addition to this awesome example that we've really gone into in a little more depth, just lays out the 5-step process, as well as a number of sort of the, appropriate ways to set up your business soil, which then kind of come back in some areas at the last chapter, or second to last chapter. And the 5 steps are, number 1, pinpoint what are the behaviors that you are looking for that will lead to the results you want to see. Step 2, measure those behaviors as simply and quickly as possible, because you just need to know, is this getting better, is this getting worse, or is this staying the same? Step 3, agree on expectations. Make sure you talk to everybody about the behaviors you have data on, the results you are looking for, discuss with them about what you want to see happen, get feedback about barriers, come up with that plan, and commit to the new behaviors with the group. Step 4, deliver feedback about the behaviors that are being measured as to whether they are improving or not. And then step 5, recognize improvement, praise any change in right direction. And I think step 4 and 5 are where I got the most confused, isn't the right word, but definitely from the way I always practice things like BST or think of positive reinforcement in terms of supervision. Step 4 and 5 to me, I always consider them the exact same thing. If I'm delivering feedback and recognize, I know they're not exactly the same thing, but usually I put my feedback, I have my praise, and I have my corrected feedback there. But I guess the recognize improvement, and when we get to that chapter, we can talk more about it. At first, I thought it was going to be more about those organizational systems of recognizing improvement, but then sometimes it just felt like it was just talking, positive praise type activities, which felt a little more like it belonged in the chapter about feedback, especially because he talks about the ratios of feedback.
Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. I think the recognize improvement was, I think it could be like a step 4B, because I think you really wanted to highlight, right, that even the smallest bit of improvement should be celebrated. You shouldn't go from 0 to 1. You shouldn't feel like you have to go from 0 to 100. I mean, right, he brings the point up over and over. It could take years, depending on the complexity. You have to keep trying. So I think that's like a 4B, but given our field outside, like people think that things should change overnight. They're like, I've said it's going to change, so it will. And then if it doesn't, so I think that's why he made that the final one. is to really hone in that nothing's actually going to change unless you provide reinforcement.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe he wanted to kind of call it shaping behavior, but he chose a more friendly, business-friendly term instead, and that would have separated it from delivering feedback.
Yeah.
Well, and I think feedback has like just a more neutral to negative connotation outside of like a BST model that like, oh, deliver feedback. Oh, well, we only had a 1% improvement. So like we need to make this better.
Right.
That's not a reinforcing statement. That's not. Yeah. It's just like, hey, but we had a 1% improvement. So we're on the right track.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yay, look at us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Like, so we're going to keep going through this process, which is not like the most fun, but we're seeing results from it. So we'll try it a couple more times.
Yeah.
So
and he also said like he saw collateral changes in other leaders in the company when he modeled this step 5 shaping behavior, basically, right? And so then the other leaders started doing the same, like they were bringing the Gatorade and the donuts, right, for when they met their criteria and stuff. So that it produced other benefits.
And I think also the way that I noticed that he this is different from feedback in the way that we talked about it is like the social validity component seems to be in that feedback stage, not just like did the performance change? It's and now it's now the people who are implementing these changes need to get feedback on what the process was like.
Right.
Yeah.
So
do they want the donuts and Gatorade? Right.
Yeah, do they want another pizza for lunch? Like,
But
The answer is yes, of course. Who doesn't?
I like that.
Yeah. And then the rest of the chapter, we kind of already talked about. It goes over some of the environmental conditions that need to be in place for the 5-step process to work, which then comes up again in chapter 8. Again, I both feel like chapter 8 should have gone here.
Yeah.
But also, it might have been way too much to throw at everybody before you even get to the 5-step results part of the book. So I'm a little torn in that. I mean, it's missing, but it also shouldn't be here.
I guess I completely get how this happened because I've had this happen many times in my own development of an outline. Is you're like, oh, it's easy. It's just these 3 main points I want to make. And so you're like, point number 1, point number 2, point number 3, but oh wait, before they really are going to get point number 2, there are, turns out, 8 to 10 subpoints of point number 1 that I actually need to lay out for point number 2 to be ready to be absorbed. And that's exactly what has probably happened here. Like if you went back and looked at first draft outline, it was probably chapter 1, chapter 8, chapter 9. But it turned out chapter 1 was actually 7 chapters long.
I'm going to use a term, and Alan probably will get this reference. Maybe some RPG fans out there might get it. But I kind of feel like a 5-step plan should have a step 0 or a session 0 where you just lay out this is what you want to have in as part of your business. And this is how you explain and set this up. And this is where you set the safety rules about your psychological safety about being in your business. I kind of feel like maybe that's where it should have gone.
Why is Alan only one to understand?
Because an RPG, session 0, it's an RPG term.
Oh, okay.
You do it before you start your new campaign.
I didn't get it.
I was like, if you had just used the term session 0, but you did explain it just a little bit, so like other people can get it too. But no.
Okay.
Yeah, just like a step to say, hey, we're going to do this because I think it would also be important to say we're doing this because I want to be a better leader because I recognize that there's problems, not I'm not happy with this company. And so we're going to go through this process to like fix all the problems you're causing me because there is often a perception of that of like we're not getting the outcome we want. So we're going to start this whole new process because like the profit margin isn't what it needs to be. But it was just like, hey, like I want to be a better leader. We're going to go through this process and be like, okay, so you have a little bit more, maybe a little bit more like buy-in at the start with that session 0.
That kind of hits. I think this is important. He hits on some like things that you need. You need to make sure everyone feels safe to talk and disclose that they're not, and that's hard to do, right? But if you say what you said, Alan, like I need to be, I'm not doing as well as I should do, right? And that goes around with being fair, right? We're going to be taking data on everyone's behavior, not just this one sole person's. And then here's the kicker, worker-centric. And the point is, you need them more than they need you. Totes right now, right? Like, people are like, I don't love my job, I'm just going to quit. There's not like this, I'm in it for the long haul kind of feeling anymore, right?
Yeah.
And I was going to say that also like totally connects back to a lot of like Peter Drucker style management stuff of like, you have to respect the work. Like, workers are your assets. They are why you have any productivity at all is because your employees are doing the work.
Yeah.
Dr. Austin also then recommends a ton of books that you could also be reading to learn about some of these pieces, which maybe is not a great idea to do in chapter 2 of your book, because, you know, I understand why it's like, well, you're not going to read all about, you know, influences and nudges. You're not going to be like, I better drop this book and then, you know, go read Nudge real quick and then come back and start this book again. So maybe that would have been the end. Maybe that one could have gone in the end of the book, you know, to remind everyone. Here's some other, for further reading.
I didn't get that. I didn't feel that chapter.
No, I mean, I just felt that he was saying like, this is really important stuff, because if you put it all at the end, people might not do that. He's like, this is an important part. And in fact, like, maybe if you don't understand what psychological safety is, put this book down. Don't misapply my principles until you understand something a little bit more.
That could be.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, because I see in each of these little chapters of the book about it, but I think that's because he's not going to go into any of these, right?
I understood the reasoning.
Yeah. So I didn't feel that way, but yeah, I see.
I'm always sort of torn when people like suggest, because I love, you know, the idea of further reading, because, you know, but I'm also, and I think we are also people who actively choose to use our free time to have these discussions and record them. So when someone suggests another book, we're like, sounds great. I'm going to add it to my list and we'll get to it. And who knows, we might talk about it.
I don't
whereas I don't know if I'm, you know, Bob's CEO, I'm like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for this garbage. Someone told me I had to read this. I'm just going to go back to blaming my employees. But who knows?
But that person is probably not going to get a lot out of this book.
Right.
They might not. But maybe when they get to step 4,
though. Like chapter 2 in a book, you're like, I'm about to learn so much, and I can now learn so much more. And you write them down because you're going to go look them up later. Whereas at the end of the book, you're like, I've accomplished something, and I'm done with that. Am I going to read more books? Not right now.
But then I'm brought up
reinforcement pause
to everyone's favorite classic, the children's literature, Grover in the Museum of Everything. At the end of the book, when he leaves the museum, and everything is still available to search. I feel like you share your new books at the end, because there's so much more to learn and you're so jazzed. But I guess if you're worried no one's going to like this. You know what? We need to measure this and then agree on expectations.
Jesus topic.
I also think that he was just saying, like, instead of just blandly citing like this concept comes from this, he's like, this is from this. Yeah. Read it.
Yeah. Well, I kind of liked that.
Yeah.
Right. He's not. I don't know.
It's some heavy stuff that he's, you know, and he's getting into lots of other areas that are definitely beyond the scope of this book. So responsibly, I think he's saying, if you want to really understand these topics, you should go.
They should be there. Right. I think the question is, where do they go? So that's the study for the future. Do you tell people go read a bunch of other books in the middle of your book or at the end of your book? Or hey, probably not at the very beginning, because everyone says, well, I'm going to read the rest of this book. I got a bunch of other books. I'll go read those instead.
So would you have preferred it if he said self-management, such as in this, and was bland about it? Because he's also just like citing the concept.
Yeah.
Like from a source.
And that's kind of where I'm torn with some of my feelings on this book, is it feels like it brings up like there's no content that I'm like, this is bad, I don't want this content. It just, when it gets thrown at me, sometimes I felt like, yes, this is exciting me. And sometimes I felt like, well, why aren't I just reading this book instead? Or like, this isn't explaining the situation as well as it needs to. And it's telling me I missed the context. Like, I'm not going to read the rest of your book. So it mixed results for me, at least.
It's like, because we're not the target audience, I think.
Yeah. And that's, you know, sometimes when we do these book clubs, the question is this a book? It's in the field of behavior analysis, behavioral science, but is it worth it for the average behavior? I don't want to say average, diminutively, but in terms of like the broad swath of most people who are practitioners rather than leaders of a business.
I don't know. There are a lot of people that I would say that would just like, oh yeah, you can apply this outside of like out of the field that we normally do.
Yeah.
And there are probably seasoned behavior analysts who might benefit from this just because they've never had to apply it quite like this. So,
especially those that never took the 8-hour supervision training.
yeah.
Yep.
Or an
Right.
OBM class. Like if you never had to take an OBM class because that's a newer thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. All right, let's move on into the 5 steps. Chapter 3, step 1. That's your 5 steps. Chapter 3 is step 1, pinpointing. Maybe they should have started with chapter -1, chapter 0. Chapter 1 is step 1. That's there we go. Let's try that out in a book. So pinpointing. We get an example of an ABA company, which is, I think, this is like the example of supervision conundrum. I'm a great RBT. Now I've been promoted. Maybe I became a BCBA, and now I need to supervise other RBTs. And no one ever taught me how to be a leader, how to do these things. And I don't even know what I'm supposed to tell people to do. And I don't even know how to know what's not working. So an example, many of us, probably every single BCBA in the field has come up to at some point. So very poignant. And then we discussed the idea of pinpointing. We had an Ogden Lindsley quote. Page 55, to define the behavior, pinpointing, to define the behavior in a way that allows for it to be observed and measured.
I love that this one
ratings.
is bullet. This is so important, right? Because it's bolded in the text, and then they've pulled it out and put it bolded on the side too. So it's like double bold.
Mm-hmm. It's a real textbook
Yeah.
kind of format.
If you didn't get it the first time, here it is again.
I just, instead of having a SMART goal, you should have an Omar pinpoint. Is all I could think about, because he uses like observable, measurable, active, reliable. Like I just saw that and couldn't think about it.
I think most people, in the field, most people listening to this are going to say, yeah, pinpointing. I know how to measure behavior. I know how to set up systems, operationally define what I'm looking for. But I do appreciate, and I think many of us probably do this, but thinking about that acid test is I don't remember if he used the term acid test or I'm just using it here. But once you write your definition, say, hey, everybody, I'm measuring blank. And then have someone ask you, what do you mean by that? And explain it. And if they're not able to say, oh, I bet I could find that. Is it like this? Guess what? Your definition's bad. Go back and try again. Is what you should say to yourself. My definition's bad. I'm not going to tell you that as your boss, because I'm just here to talk about the problems. We're all going to come up with a solution together.
And this is one of the times I appreciate it. I like that he just notes that this term is used as early as the 50s by Ogden Lindsley when he was working for Skinner. And I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen that. So like I appreciated that little bit of extra precision in him citing what he's talking about, because that was really that I just like that. So I'm that kind of person.
This book definitely, when it uses jargon, uses it well and explains it. Keeps the jargon in it. I think ABC, they started about antecedent behavior consequence right at the end of the book, which that felt like a lot of information right at the end of a book you just read. Like that was the one that sort of stood out as seemed like a misplace. But everything else, it really just gave you just enough information. Sometimes it gave you more than you wanted, but never that much more. Just enough to be like, that piques my interest.
I think one thing that I'd like to highlight that obviously we do, but I think sometimes we forget, and I think business leaders may not, is on page 57. They say, don't judge the person, just observe the behavior and learn.
Yep. Right?
I think that is something that as a worker, I would have appreciated, right? And I think if it, as a supervisor saying, like, I'm going to be observing you, I'm going to be taking data, but I'm not going to be judging what you're doing. Right. Yeah. This is purely just to see how we are working. I think that would have made me feel a lot better, because I remember in some of my earlier jobs, I did feel judged. Like I did feel self-conscious and not confident when my supervisor would come around, because they would just sit there like giving me like the face that no one ever wants to see on your supervisor face. Right. So I think I did want to pull that out, is that's, I think, one way when you're thinking about pinpointing is just to reminding yourself that when you're writing your pinpoint, to not be judgy about it, right? To be that objective.
Yeah. Actually, you just reminded me of a time someone observed me, and it was something I knew I could do, so I wasn't really nervous, but I think they were a newer supervisor, And while they're observing me, they ask me questions like, why did you do it that way? And while I believe their intent was just really a curiosity, was just to sort of see what I said, to get a sense of kind of my clinical thought, I did not know this person. So I perceived, why did you do it that way, as because you're doing it wrong, or because that's not how I like to do it. And so I still remember that as a bad observation, not because I think I did anything wrong, but because, well, this supervisor's a jerk and I don't want to listen to them. And wondering, like, could they have either built a relationship with me first, or said, I am just here. If I ask you questions, it is so I learn. I am not going to be telling you how to do anything different. I just really need to learn the ropes. I'm new. Would I have taken that right off the bat as, oh, so I'm just curious why you did it? That would I've taken as, oh, well, let me tell you why I did it. Like, this is a chance for me to share what I'm doing and good at, rather than, listen, new boss, I don't need your new procedure. I know how to do my job, and I don't need to listen to you in the future.
That new boss is going to send you an email now that they're listening to the podcast. Like, I'm so sorry.
It's not a current boss. It's not a current boss. So if they emailed me to tell me how to do my job, I'm like, I don't understand why you're telling me this. You've had a lot of problems if you think I still work there.
But that would just be funny.
Many, many years ago.
But I think that goes back to the point that he makes about like psychological safety, and something that I think a lot of management books really just we should harp on more in supervision and in management is like this process of supervision. We're like dealing with a person who has like a lot, like they've invested a lot of time at some level to be here, or they've taken some, like they are relying on this interaction to continue their like livelihood, to keep living. So like the context of work is already like stressful, super stressful. This isn't just something that like you can walk away from.
Your hobby.
Easily, yeah. Like this is not just like a relationship between friends. Like we have the power to like take away this person's security at any moment, and so that's going to shade their entire like. So like, don't judge. It's like actively communicate that you are not being judgmental.
Right.
In terms of content, I don't think there's a ton in here that if you're coming at this as a BCBA would really struggle too much with. Maybe some good reminders. I did appreciate it felt a little bit like a tangent, but I think was related to the overall themes of the book, and that this is, business and results are a team effort. And the idea of, when do you let your employees choose the pinpoints that are valuable, or how do you include them in that conversation? And I think it gives a lot of great suggestions in terms of maybe giving, you choose the pinpoint, but you make it clear that they're going to have a lot of say in some of the process. Maybe you ask them to choose the pinpoint, and that you ask them to pick something that you don't think is necessarily as important, but will be a great way to practice the process, maybe as part of developing the psychological safety of the business, that feed for it. I want to do this as a part of my learning as a leader, how to run this procedure, and you'll all help me that by thinking of something that would be easy to fix or simple to fix, right? Or here's some options of pinpoints that I think are going to be important for the overall results of our company. Which ones do you think will have the highest return of investment? And, so a lot of options as to how you can include your employees in the pinpointing process, which often I think we see as I'm the boss, so I'll think of the pinpoint, and then I will tell everyone what that pinpoint is, which may need to happen sometimes, but is not a requirement of pinpointing. Yeah.
In the workbook section of this chapter, this is when they start having you ask yourself about the foundational pieces. Is there psychological safety? Is communication lean and easy to understand? Is there behavioral integrity? Do I say what I will do? Do my coworkers? And then I love that they added this in here, self-management. Do I manage my own behavior and keep my promises? Do my coworkers? So these are the things that you should be asking yourself once you've pinpointed, to make sure that everything's moving along in the process. And the one reflection that I love on this worksheet, I'm just going to tell you all my favorite parts of the worksheet, is there something that would make your life better if you could improve it? I think that would be a really telling prompt, right? If you're thinking professionally and you wrote something down, and is that the same as your pinpoint? And if not, why? Why is it not the same? Right? And so that's kind of, right? That's kind of the flow of that worksheet. So I thought that part was particularly helpful, because I actually wrote something different in this reflection part than my actual pinpoint. And turns out once I did a little more work on going through the reflection process and going through the what am I going to actually pinpoint, they were different. So I went and changed my pinpoint based on the answers to those reflections questions.
What was your pinpoint, Jackie?
I'm not going to tell you. It's personal, Rob.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you were bringing it up. So you wanted to talk about the process of developing something on this very public podcast, but not the details of it.
Not the details, no.
Okay.
No,
I will tell everyone my idea for a pinpoint, and then I sort of felt I needed to abandon it because I didn't know if we could get results. But I know one of the concerns, the school year is starting up again, and one of the concerns always comes in attendance. Oh, people, there's so many things going on. People can't come to work, or people quit, and we don't have enough people to, we don't have enough employees. So I was trying to focus on what if everyone focused on arriving on time? And then I started thinking of it as that might not be a bad pinpoint, but based on my ability in any, public schools are huge organizations. And we're talking about a lot of factors that are not going to be changeable by the organization itself. It started becoming one of those, it felt insurmountable, and I didn't feel like I had enough of the 10,000 foot view. So I sort of had to drop it in terms of what would be the systems. I think you still could pinpoint it, and you could certainly talk to employees about what are some of the reasons it's hard to get here on time. What are some of the reasons that attendance is low? And you might find, maybe you wouldn't be able to do the whole 5-step process, but you might find some issues. Could they be related to psychological safety of I hate this job, but I have to have a job because, where are we in the economy? What if there's another pandemic? Everyone's thinking of fears that, they never used to think about with a job. Or it could be related to, I'm not sure, some of the expectations. So maybe there are expectations that need to be shared through the 5-step process. But I wasn't really, it felt like it was going to be too broad. So I kind of wasn't able to keep going with the workbook without getting some of the data on the process. But anyway, that was my attempt.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, Rob. And I think it would be hard for you too, because you don't directly supervise anyone, right? Yeah. You do, but you don't have your own classroom. Right?
Yeah, not well, even if you're, and again, those folks who've worked in a public school, even if you are a teacher who works with maybe say a paraprofessional in your classroom, you're not that person's boss.
Yeah.
You're expected to be in charge of them at all times, but you can't do anything if they never show up. You can go complain to somebody else about it, maybe talk to them about it, but that's not necessarily going to change, because then it's cycles of blame, shame, and retrain kind of in a way. Right. So that's
what I was thinking. It'd be harder for you in your job, right? Because you don't have that structure that you could make those changes, right?
No, and I don't directly supervise RBTs regularly anymore. Yeah. I consult. Yeah, so it did become one that I thought I was just trying to think of something that I know this is a problem. I'll be helpful, and then I was not. But I think there are some steps in the process that I think I'm going to share some of those thoughts with the folks who do have more of the supervision piece, and we'll see what they say.
Yeah,
I'm sure they'll be open to it. I just. Maybe they will not agree that is the main reason to get results. There's a lot of factors in schools that go beyond my narrow purview.
This is just a little bit of a meander off, but I meant to bring it up in the previous chapter, but it kind of applies here too. I think one, not exactly criticism, but one caveat for applying these kinds of systems is it assumes a uniformity across all your workers' motivations and goals, and also just how they communicate, what is effective. Because I was thinking about this felt like it needed just occasional be and communicate with your person and find out what works for them. Mm-hmm. Because in terms of I'm a different type of worker than other workers in terms of how I often want something a lot more blunt, or I just need the how. I really just need I'm struggling. I understand the why, I understand the what. I just don't know how to get to A to B because I'm new to this. That's where my learning curve is. Other people do need a much more this is important for this reason. Oh, okay. Understanding those priorities and things like that. Yeah. So I think just ideas about neurodiversity and things could potentially be emphasized more, or if you're learning from this, know that it's a limitation, that like you can come up with a system that works for 90% of your employees, and that 10%, they're not failing. They just need something else or something different than what everyone else needs.
Yeah. I like that, Alan. Good point.
Yeah. And I think, in a lot of ways, the book does allow for, if you're noticing improvement, that doesn't mean that you have done everything that needs to be done. But the sad reality of, if you are the leader of a business and you say, we did this thing and the results improved by 40%, that may still leave a lot of people who are frustrated at your company. But, 40% is pretty good for improvement in a business. So maybe we move on to the next thing, even though if we went back and iterated on this process, we could find a lot of ways to make, continue to make improvements.
The only reason I say it though, is that because if you don't manage everybody in a way that, and you only like, oh, this 40% improvement here is fine, you're going to end up with employees who like are lagging behind because they're not getting an active management style. And then you're going to dismiss them for like performance metrics when they're like, they've not been taught about those metrics, or those metrics don't incorporate what they need. So that would be my one counterpoint to what you're saying.
I completely agree with that point, Alan. It's hopefully that you would, if you were using this process, you would always be thinking about, maybe you can't come back to some of those challenges right away, but you'd be focusing on an environment where if things aren't working out, but there's still improvement, you're not judging improvement equals everything's perfect. So much as improvement is, we made some ideas and they led to improvement. Could we do more? Yes. Can we do it and have the resources to do that now? Again, as a leader, you have to decide some of those things. And maybe we're going to come back to that later. Or maybe I have one of my managers focus on that. Maybe that's a goal they want to focus on. And they do talk about some ideas for sustainability at the end of the book.
And what brought that to my mind was just reading his common pinpoints about like managers speaking to their team member each and every day. I know so many people that be like, do not talk to me every day, because then I feel like I'm doing something wrong, or you're keeping tabs on me, and I do not want that. Like, leave me alone.
Which is funny, Alan, because I read that and I was like, yeah, I would love it if my boss talked to me every day. Which was funny because I'm like, I would love if they just stopped by and said, hey, I'd be like, oh, right? But that's funny that we had completely didn't take on that.
Like I would like it, but I could just think of so many people in my life that'd be like, do not talk to me every day unless there is a good reason.
Right?
And,
yeah. I think that's how my boss feels, to be honest. Why are you calling me again?
All right.
In 5 minutes.
Right?
All right. Chapter 4, measurements. Again, most of our listeners were BCBAs. We do a lot of practice and measurement. There were still a couple fun examples in this chapter. Like, if you did not know how to do data measurement, I'm not 100% sure if, because you understand like business and sort of pinpointing in the business world specifically, whether you had enough to figure out what to do. But I'm guessing you're looking at different types of data than we're mostly looking at. You probably could think of something. There are some fun examples here. Like if you were doing, the time management, you could do, with coding, like looking at your calendar. If you wanted to work on organizing your space, you could take before and after pictures of your space, which I kind of like that idea of like, I've got a whole list of pictures of my space. Yeah.
I have done that because my office at one point, now it's gotten back, but it was one point was horrifically disgusting. And I was feeling really sad. And I was like, okay, I'm going to show gradual improvement. So each day I picked like one half of a something to clean. And then I did take a picture every day, and it did make me feel like so good.
I remember.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I didn't want to start because it was horrific in there. I think people were like living under my desk because it was like so bad.
I liked in this chapter how he said, you may already have an existing measurement system that you can use for this purpose, and you don't need to create something brand new and elaborate.
Yeah.
So try to think about what is already in place and whether that is a quote unquote good enough measurement that you can just use that. So you save everyone all of the heartache of learning and then implementing a new system.
Yeah. I think when you think about being a business, we usually think of our data as something, because we're publishing an article or we're looking at research or we're doing, the single case design, and we do need to see kind of a, ABA in our graph, that pattern. But if you're in a business, you just really need to know, does this like relatively broad metric or whatever metric that is valuable to us, is it better? If it's better, then great. That's good. Like, we're probably good enough. We can keep doing the thing that we're doing. I think go over some pitfalls when it comes to, if you pick the wrong pinpoint, or especially when you talk about feedback and rewards, you may find yourself looking at the wrong thing. So there's always a danger. But again, if you got the system, it's meant to be sort of a broader review of, are things improving? Are the behaviors that you pinpointed improving? Doesn't need to be a new system.
Oh, I was just going to say, I thought of this as like in terms of like, if you wanted to add psychological safety to something you do, you would definitely want to have like a survey just to see if people feel like the organization is. But like another good metric would just be like, and has that affected attendance? Has that affected like how is it going to impact something that's important to your day-to-day operation that's more than just a survey or qualitative? Like, there's probably like, because if people are feeling more psychologically safe in your organization, it would probably be helpful to know, like, oh, well, like attendance overall has improved, but we've also been taking more PTO time. It's like that might be a trade-off for some that like managers don't like at first, but it's like, no. Like you've made improvements and people are using their PTO time because they feel safe in your organization. It probably means you're not going to have to retrain as much.
Yeah.
Right. We're looking to see if people start asking questions during meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like how many times people talk. You could like have a little clicker in your pocket.
Because and it's funny you said, I was actually thinking for like Rob, an example for you would be like, I know you do consultation. Like, do you do like larger presentations? Is there a way for you to apply this to like, oh, how do I know if people are actually like listening to me?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like what about for what you do have control over, like people have to listen to me. Is there anything you can do or change to like make your consultation better? I could see that being helpful just for that kind of like, you're not leading people in the traditional sense. So what can you apply this to?
You could take data on number of head nods.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
With partial interview recording. Every 30 seconds if someone nods a head, then you know that they're listening. You just pick one person in the audience. And
unless their head nods because they fell asleep and they're trying to
wake up. I could probably operationally define those as two different types of head. There's like that panic, like bug eyes at the end. It's not a good head nod.
That would be hilarious. That would be so funny. It has to be a controlled head nod. I just think
the velocity of head nod down has to be the same velocity up for it to count.
Wow.
Would you wear this weird rubber band on your head so I could measure head nods effectively, please?
I was like, an attendant head nod is probably how I would define that as a non-example would be falling asleep.
I love that. Anyway.
Sorry, I don't think that's happening in your talks. You're very dynamic.
Oh, thank you so much. All right.
The last thing about this chapter before I move on to chapter 3 or 5, but step 3.
We're going backwards. Oh no!
Going backwards is he gives you like a little graph part where you can.
Listeners could see Jackie hold up the book.
I was holding up the book for everyone. There's a place where you can graph your data. Graph. Yeah, a little bar graph, or not even maybe. I guess it would be a bar graph, but
yeah. I appreciate anyone who says, listen, you get your data, just draw a little graph on a piece of paper. I love it. When people get too fancy schmancy with their graphical software, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Make your own graph.
Yeah. I did the same thing when my dog was when he was first coming here to my house and he was having an enormous amount of pee accidents. I just was like, every day I'd put a little dot on a graph and I was like, it's not you. It's not you. And so when the graph would go down a little bit, I'd be like, yes, it's not me. It's just a data point. It's happening. So that did help. I didn't have to go to Microsoft Excel or I didn't have to do anything. I could just draw it out.
Yeah.
My whole family loved it. They were all participating.
All right. The chapter goes into some self-monitoring too as a data system, which is, we've done some episodes on self-monitoring, or you can certainly read more about self-monitoring, but it gives a pretty, quick snapshot of how that could work for your organization. Chapter 5, agreeing on expectations. I think this was probably my favorite chapter in the book in terms of taking your information and then presenting it to the group and then getting feedback from the group and then sort of thinking about how do you explain why something might be changing, but also including people. I did really like that.
I was also wondering if he could have done a little side arrow, because this could also be in the beginning, right? Before you choose a pinpoint, agreeing on what the expectations are, and then as a group choosing the pinpoint. Because when I read this, I thought, oh, this could go before pinpointing, if you're not going to be like the solo person that chooses that.
Yeah.
But I understand why he did it here, right? So you have the data, but I also think if you're trying to be a little more collaborative, agreeing on expectations might be number one.
And it does come up in the earlier saying, and we even brought up the idea of talking with your employees about, some ideas for change or getting their feedback on the pinpoint that you're talking. I think some of it might be just the artifacts that come from, I need to take this very complex, multi-system human organism interaction series of behaviors, and I got to boil it down to 5 points. There's no way to do it without. And some of these points kind of are the same as some of the other points. And some of the behaviors you're going to engage in this section, you kind of did it already, and you're kind of going to do it again. So I'm not sure how much of it was just that reality of you could do some of these beforehand and should in some ways. You also have to do it here, but it doesn't make as much sense if again, do you want to have the 5 steps? And within those steps, you've got a lot of 1A, 1B, 1C. Then we sort of cycle. Is it a flow chart? Would a flow chart make more sense or be too hard? It could be part of that. Is it where does this have to happen?
Yeah, I get that. I did wonder myself if this would have been better suited as a flowchart, but I think it would have been more complicated. And if you're trying to, he did say if he's trying to make it simple, this makes it simple, right? Showing it's an iterative, it never stops, right? And it's you can't screw up.
Yeah.
You can't
as
screw
I've
up,
gotten old,
nowhere else to go besides the next step, right? So I think for purposes of simpleness, you can't really do a flowchart because flowcharts get more complicated. Right, because there's more ways, there's more things to do and ways to go. Even though there might be, right? But that's not the purpose of the book.
No. And as I've gotten older, I've been more comfortable with the idea of this clearly isn't doing everything, but if I start somewhere easy, there'll be a place for me to come back and say, well, I don't really like this step. I'm going to write it this way, but I'm at least, doing it from a place of acknowledging what I've learned and what I haven't learned versus I don't want to do this. I'm going to do what I've always done and hope for the best.
You have done better at that, Rob.
Thank you.
I feel bad going off on a tangent after a compliment. So I don't work with Rob enough to know if it is approved or not. But I'm glad to hear that you're seeing some self-management change, Rob. That is excellent.
My self-reports look great. Everyone else's, I haven't looked at them.
I like this chapter because I don't know why, but I love the performance diagnostic checklist. It was really... It's one of my favorite things. I loved. I remember learning about this in grad school. Like, why don't we see this everywhere all the time?
Right, and it even gives you. We did a whole episode on PDC HS, and I can't remember what episode.
I'm aware because that was one of the things that made me join the join the Patreon and everything because I liked it so much.
Yeah, and it's my favorite. And there's so little research on it. And it even gives you the answers. It's like, here's a problem. Oh, look, here's an answer. Like, where in the world does this ever happen?
Yeah. And I really love it because the idea, it was tied, and I think it's very logical to is the hill skill or will? And kind of go through that, environmental variables that you can change, training that you can do to improve performance, and then you've done those things and you're confident that you've done them well. Let's look at some antecedent and consequence based strategies to try to improve the person's motivation to do it. But it's that shouldn't be I think we too often go to that step instead of saying what about the process makes this difficult?
Yeah.
Is like are like notes not getting done because like or not getting synced because the internet is problematic, or is are there elopements more elopements in the environment because like the doors are all left cracked open because of like heating and air problems? Like, what can you change?
Yeah.
About the physical environment and setting that up first, like thinking about like my ideal, like I'm starting a business or I'm starting a process. You can go through these steps before you even have something done to be like, well, what would get in the way of someone doing this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's not, so it's not just a way to like, it's like you have your operational definition and then you can make it practicalize it.
Yeah.
Like, let's practice the steps of this.
Mm.
Oh, it's perfect.
Almost a little give a mouse a cookie in a way when I think about it. It's like, well, if I were doing this, I would need to do this. And then I would need to do this.
All right. So I do appreciate the sort of meeting agenda of your meeting with whichever group you're supervising to go over the agreement to expectation. It's going to take you 30 to 60 minutes. Explain why what you want to, what the result is or what the improvement project is important. You share your data. And then you ask the team what they think. Do they agree? Did something get left out? Are there barriers? And then you just take notes. If they don't get feedback, you probably want to go back and start again. That's where your PDC, possibly HS, possibly not, comes in. And then you talk about, all right, here's the plan. Let's ask for a commitment to follow the plan. Make sure you share, this is how I'll be following the plan, and this is how I'll be sharing the results of the plan. This is how I'll be presenting the feedback to everybody. And your public commitment from you and from anyone in your meeting, we're going to work to improve the situation with the focus on we're improving a situation, not improving any one of us. Mm-hmm. And if everyone's like, no, it's impossible, you're missing some of those initial soil steps, and that's where your PDC is going to come in. You can always ask everyone why again, and don't forget, maybe add in a break in your meeting agenda because people might be getting cranky if they disagree with your pinpoint, or if they feel that the reason you're not getting change in results for that pinpoint are due to barriers that they're not comfortable talking about. So that could lead to some bad feelings.
I love that because when people put breaks in my longer meetings, I get annoyed. I'm like, come on, you're wasting my time. I do not want a break here. But if the rationale was so that everyone can be more level-headed, then I would be more likely to be okay with the break. But I do hate it when somebody just pops a break in the hour meeting and they're like, let's take 5 minutes. And I was like, I cannot get anything done in 5 minutes. Right? Like, I hate breaks in short meetings. Because especially if this one's only 30 minutes long.
And depending on, and we did a whole episode on agendas and running awesome meetings. You may want to build into your agenda a think time, or you may have wanted to share this data ahead of time. Because if you're going to say, what do we think are here's some ideas I have. What feedback do you have on some other barriers or ways we could make improvements here? If you're just throwing it at everybody, they may or may not be able to say anything. They may be like, I don't know. So you may want to either have shared that data ahead of time, or you may want to give enough of a break time that like, let's break into groups. So let's take 20. And I want you to just be thinking about this while you're doing your other things so that you can come back and have a productive rest of the meeting. But again, that's going to make your meeting go longer. So it's.
But I like that. If you said, here's think time. I love it when people build in think time. I hate it when they say just a break, right? Because it doesn't give you any direction to what you should actually be doing.
Yeah. Again, if you haven't done the pre-steps and people don't feel safe sharing ideas, you won't get anywhere with these results because no one will share any ideas and you may struggle to find the relevant behaviors that need to change, or they won't share barriers that you could actively change, but you don't know they exist necessarily. So that can always be tough. But ideally, you've done all this process and everyone is sharing. Everyone at the level you're working at is able to communicate what the change they're going to look at will be, which then they will share and follow this process down whatever your organizational chain is. And everyone knows what they're going to do and why and is ready to do it. And then you have something that you'll be measuring. And they know that when you talk about it the next time, it will just be to say, here's what we're seeing, and sharing positive things or barriers rather than I can't believe we had a whole meeting about this and nobody changed. I'm very upset as the boss. And, they'll be talking about appropriate feedback. And then you'll be doing all of the steps that come next as you're seeing people make these changes. There were some cool stats. But before we do that, sorry, Alan,
No, that's great. I really liked his little section about like why there aren't clear and aggressive expectations because, and I thought it was also a good example of like a very non-judgmental way to like, people don't do this because they're afraid of making people look bad or they're afraid like for one reason or another. And I think that's helpful to think about. And then doesn't say, and that's stupid, and you should not do that because it's like it's a mistake though. Because like try to address it if it's a problem, if these are problems for you. But if you're gonna have change, you need to have clear and aggressive like expectations about making that change. I just found that little three reasons why it doesn't happen helpful.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about any recent CEOs that changed into companies and how often do they badmouth whatever. I can think of one that I'm pretty sure was a real jerk about it. I can think of one that maybe is not necessarily a good person to their workers, but I don't remember hearing a lot of like, and here's what I'm going to change because the last person was so bad and messed all these things up. So I don't know. I feel like it
I don't know. Do you read CEO Quarterly?
Yeah, I'm on so many earnings calls, Diana. I gotta. Actually, technically, if anyone's got, portfolios or whatnot, or some of their 401ks, you might be able to get in on some fun earnings calls where you get to hear the CEOs have to explain their stock prices and tell you all their plans. If you were so inclined, I never have been, and I don't think I ever will be.
You just make me think of The Office where Michael is like, I don't have to like survive the company. I just have like to survive you or something like that. Of just like, I think you're going to be culpable for this more than I am. So like, I just got to weather this for a couple weeks.
All right. And when all else fails, it does seem like the word of setting expectation is remember, we are doing X in order to achieve Y. It's on page 107. Again, to remind everyone, if there is that sense of, you haven't built enough psychological safety, or you have, but maybe it's gotten heated. This isn't about you are doing a bad job. This is about we all agreed this was a good result. And we all want to change behavior because we think it will lead to the change in results. And if we disagreeing, this is a safe place to have those discussions because we want to leave this meeting ready to do whatever needs to happen next, whatever we're agreeing upon. And the agreeing upon is very important in that if you have a why, you tend to see an increase in compliance. The citation he gives is by 75%. If you include choice, you can see maybe an 18% increase in discretionary effort. Some of these I wanted a little bit more. How did you find that? But I get that the book would have gotten very long if every citation had here was the study that found this out.
They just shove it in the back, Rob.
That's like way in the back, though. I gotta go all the way there. Give me. And some of them did not. And I did find a couple of them. I didn't have like the exact citation that I wanted to follow up with afterwards too. I know a lot of them. Like I've seen Dr. Austin talk, and it's a lot of like good like Harvard Business Review studies, which aren't exactly the studies that we're typically reading, but tend to give a little bit more of that context. So some of it may be the papers you're originally going to find this information is not going to be a paper that anyone would be able to read and get this information easily. So I don't know. Okay. And then Jackie's favorite, the review and the workbook about the expectations and a place you can even do your PDCHS or PDC.
Yeah.
All right. So chapter 6, I feel like we can do chapter 6 and 7 feedback and then recognize improvement. We can kind of do them together because I feel like all the content within these sections, we typically on the show and when we've been discussing giving feedback, we typically have kind of conflated both of these steps in a lot of ways together. Is everyone okay with that? Or do we feel the content is so dissimilar that we wouldn't want to sort of go in between them both?
I think it's fine because we don't have that much time left. So
that
if we want to get
good.
to the last 2 chapters right within our time frame, I think it makes sense to condense both in a way that is useful for the people that are listening.
So again, if you've been doing or reading a lot on supervision, a lot of these statistics and a lot of the steps here are not new. This is a very nice summary of how do you figure out, who's giving the feedback? When do you give the feedback? What is the format of the feedback? Is it electronic? Is it written? Big fan of in-person, big fan of adding the visuals with your in-person versus just writing everything down. I found some of the discussion about positive reinforcement that came in chapter 7. I would have put it with chapter 6 in terms of when you're giving feedback, and even brings up that idea of when you're giving feedback, make sure you have that ratio of the positive to the corrective. So they seem very much in line. So I don't know if it's just that's not the terminology that we use in our field versus what terminology. I think, Alan, you even said this, the terminology that you would see in the business field and trying to make it clear. So again, that was just something kind of from the BCBA lens was these things are too related. I wouldn't have made them two separate points. But again, I'm also not a business person in a non-human services field.
I would say that in our field, we conflate the two for, again, like maybe parsimony or just to make it easier. But I think like separating them kind of makes sense because, again, like it's also about like management needing, like the social validity component is like important to hear before you tell someone about, like, get their feedback before you tell them about their performance, about what improvement was made. Like, listen before you tell. So I totally get why he separated it out the way that he did. And because it's also like a value thing of like, this isn't like the positive reinforcement isn't just part of feedback. It's like, no, it needs to be central to the process and needs to occur before you cycle back to the next step.
Yeah. And one thing go ahead, Diana.
He talks time and again about how one of the most important predictors of the health of your organization is not the supervisors delivering the feedback, but the supervisors soliciting feedback. And he says it in here too. I just saw the quote.
The feed forward, you mean?
Oh no, I just lost it. Dang it. It was the most important piece is, oh shoot. Just let me find it 1 second. Where did it go? Oh, the best feedback a leader can get is feedback about the impact of their behavior on others around them. Right? So it has to do with you asking for it and then you taking that in and using it to then make changes. And some of those changes may involve telling other people like feedback for their behavior, right? But one of the main important pieces here is how you are behaving within the environment that you are hoping to create.
Yeah. And I think, go ahead, Alan.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I feel like that's a step that gets missed out a lot in organizations. I haven't worked in like schools, universities. It's something that like my current employer like really values is like we have like our teams give us feedback regularly. We give feedback to our supervisors regularly. We go over that feedback in individual supervision. Like we hold ourselves accountable for that and asking for clarification about how could this improve. So I think it's something that I don't think I've seen in like schools or in other systems quite as much, at least beyond a like, and here's your chance to complain.
It's the complaining meeting that we schedule every year.
Yeah, the complaint box, which is just feeds directly into the shredder kind of feedback system. So, like, I think this is an excellent thing that we as a field have really started to like centralize that I appreciated seeing, and that I think has come up on me slowly, but thinking about like when I worked outside of behavioral science, of like, I never had a chance. I never had opportunities to do that in a meaningful way. So I think, again, this is why feedback versus like reinforcement are separated.
Two things that I liked about
that makes
this.
sense.
Yeah, two things that I like. I love that they again bring up that employee of the month doesn't work. Because I think that so many business leaders forget that, right? I have heard in a lot of businesses, they're like, oh, we don't have employee of the month. We'll just pop that in. It'll work, right? But we know that it doesn't because it just produces a whole bunch of losers and one winner. And so I love that they brought that up. And I also love that he brings up the point that you can't actually make anyone do anything. Even if you're their boss and you want them to, you can't actually make them do something. And people don't really like to be told what to do. So if you don't do it in a way that's acceptable for them, they're probably just going to quit, right? So it's really going to matter about your relationship with that person and how you interact with them, and in what sort of context you're in. That's going to be the most effective way. Even if you're their manager, right? My boss could tell me what to do something, and I'm not doing that, and then I won't do it, right?
Yeah.
Because she can't come to my house and move my arms.
Speaking of you can't make people do things. I also appreciate the idea of praising others. As much as we always say this is a great form typically to deliver your positive reinforcement. The quote in the book is praise is discretionary behavior. You can't force people to do it. You can't make them see the good things that others do, and you can't force them to build productive relationships with each other, which does come down to kind of back to that idea of safety. If you're in an organization where everyone hates each other, and you're not modeling how to receive praise, how to give praise, you could end up like in the example they give, John Austin gives in the book of, this sounded like the worst meeting. Like I can't imagine, I don't remember, this must be like an office sketch of someone who was like, we're going to say something positive about everyone at this meeting. And then people just passed. And so I'll bring in the football, and we'll throw the football around the room. And it was just a lot of like backhanded compliments, or people just outright being like, I hate you, you suck, and I don't want to work with you anymore. So you have to be careful if you're just like, we'll just say nice things about each other, and that's how we'll do. If you're not using it well, and you don't model it, and you don't receive it well, and you don't you don't work in a place where this is part of the culture, you can't just suddenly be like, we'll just praise everything and it'll all be fine. You really do have to be thinking about praise as an active behavior that you can't make people do, but you can try to set up an environment that allows for it to occur.
I just also like the section, just similarly like the intention versus impact. I think I have to explain that all the time about like reinforcer isn't what we think they like. It's what actually makes a difference.
Yep.
We confuse that all the time. And the example of the manager who offers a raffle for her staff if they improve office cleanliness, and then performance declines because no one wants to have lunch with her. That's
her, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
so painful. Oh.
So, in terms of feedback, again, we talked about some of the positives. These chapters also go into some, again, basic steps, but possibly not steps that you're using or aware of how do you receive feedback? How do you model receiving feedback? So some steps in there. And, we've done episodes on those as well. If you want to kind of learn more about them or, rather than reading that section of the book, there's some, you could throw a stone on the internet and you'll find like, here's how to take feedback. It's the same steps, have a paper and pencil, ask, questions that are informative, don't get emotional, those kinds of things. I think there was one example. There were a couple examples of correction, which again, I always conflate correction with corrective feedback. But I believe in this context, it was very much correction as someone being a jerk about how you're a failure. And then the example they give is someone from Google who was told by a mentor, you sound stupid when you say, and then sort of being like waving in a way of like, but she went back and thought that was the best feedback or the best correction I ever got. And all I took from that was, that sounds really awful and sexist and terrible. I don't like this example, and I don't know what it's doing here in the book. So I'm not sure. So I didn't quite understand when they started talking about correction versus corrective feedback versus positive reinforcement. That's where I started feeling like I didn't like some of how it was broken out. I definitely didn't like that as a correction. Like if you ever told someone you sound stupid, I think that's terrible. And as much as people do like to get corrective feedback, I think that's just being a jerk. And I would not find that helpful at all. I don't know. Maybe I'm not a high-powered CEO for that reason, but maybe I don't want to be one.
I just felt like you had to put that.
I mean, maybe the person values not seeming stupid, and maybe that context is missing. Because I don't know. And maybe they have a good relationship, because like if Jackie were to say, Alan, when you do that, it makes you sound a lot more stupid than I know. And I know you're not like that. So like, can you stop that? I don't think you want to do that. That would be received better and more wholesomely than some random person being like, you sound really dumb when you say this. Of course, then again, a random stranger telling me like, that makes you sound dumb. Oh, well, great. I'll monitor myself to see if other people agree. But yeah, it's not a great, there's not enough context there.
There's a level to it's like one of those things of if this works, it's going to be the best feedback this person ever receives. But if it fails, they're going to quit or they're going to report me to HR for my horrible. So you kind of,
I wouldn't.
A little dangerous.
I would not recommend that strategy.
Yeah.
That context is really important, right? So I've had some pretty blunt feedback given to me over the years, and if taken out of context would have sounded horrible, right? That I was the bottom 1% of all speakers, right? Presenters, which is true, I was, but to get that feedback, right? It was taken a lot better because it was with someone that I had a trusting relationship with than if, just any like a new boss or something would have told me. So I think context really matters there.
Yeah, I have a flashback now, and I'm sorry for oversharing, but I had a professor. I hadn't thought about this in a long time. This is a good example. Because he was a professor that was known for giving like very blunt feedback. And something he was trying to work on and everything. And I was talking to him, and I remember him saying like, "Alan, there's something that you do that I want to talk to you about. It shows that you're paying attention. And I can understand, and you're not even aware that you're doing it, but you have a tendency to say the last word of someone's sentence along with them when you're actively listening because you're like looking and trying to like follow and anticipate what they're saying. It's like, it's totally fine. But like some people, not me, but some people might find that off-putting. And I felt like maybe it was something he had done or had other people do. But I was just like, so like the context of like, stop doing that. But yeah, so just thinking about like, and that's something that I really like try not to do so much anymore.
I do the same thing, but what I've done now is when I'm listening to someone, you'll notice this, my students have picked it up. When they talk, I write in cursive the last word that they said on body parts or on tables. When like people are talking, I'll like write the last word out.
When
someone said, "How are you?" I'm like, "You."
Yeah. Yeah, I still do it a lot too. So I just do it up here.
Yeah. Now I do it written on the body.
All right, moving into the home stretch. Chapter 8, which we kind of think would have been Chapter 2 or 1, preparing the soil. Again, is it here because now that you've learned the 5 steps, think about what's missing and do these things as your initial, probably simple pinpoints because you can control every aspect of how you create, the climate as a leader. You could kind of control how you develop psychological safety. You can develop meaningful relationships, which gives you a whole step-by-step, week-by-week list of how to develop effective means of getting to know the people you supervise, which I kind of appreciated having it laid out that way.
I loved that. And I'm wondering now that we've talked about the whole book, I'm wondering if we don't like the title. I'm wondering like the title of the chapter, Preparing the Soil. I'm wondering if he had like called it like Cultivating the Soil or Ending the Soil, right? I'm wondering if he would have called it something different because when you say preparing the soil, it does sound like it's something you should have done before. But I think in the context of the book, it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, there's not really a beginning or an ending.
Right? So I think if he would have said like cultivating, then I think we would have been better. We would have felt better because reading it does fit well here, right? But the chapter Preparing the Soil feels like it should be in the beginning, right? But I think if he would have titled it differently, we might feel okay about this because now you've done the 5 steps. Continue doing these things, right? I think that's what he's saying.
In the context of practice, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, and I think also, I would just say that I think prepare is perhaps chosen just to like, advocate for why they did what they did. It's like, so you've been doing this for yourself. You've been applying this to yourself. Now go forward and do it
with everyone.
With everyone. So
chapter 9, you just went right into chapter 9 right there, right? Because that's what he says. He's like, look, self-management is part of it, but you have to do it with everybody else too.
Yeah. So I think it's also the idea like it's a linear book describing a cyclical process.
Yeah,
and so
which is
it's just
hard,
like
right?
apply it to yourself. Now that you've read my other 7 chapters, now go and set up an environment where you can do this process in a helpful way, which feels backwards in a certain sense, but also like makes sense in terms of, so now that you have this, make it give yourself an environment, but also does what he's doing of saying, now that you're going to do this, set up the environment so that you can apply this process that we've just learned. So I think it does make sense, but it's,
You know what? I just turned into that person that I hate during meetings that's like, let's talk about this one word. Literally, we have meetings that are like 3 hours long that people are like, can we change this one tiny word? I'm like, who cares? And I just was that person. I'm feeling so sad right now.
And hearing y'all talk about this, I'm reminded of those old like Goofy cartoons where Goofy would learn to do something and there'd be the narrator who would be like, step 1, do this. And then you'd watch Goofy do it and he'd like mess up. And then they'd go to step 2. I almost feel like this book would have worked better in some way. Maybe that's why it's an audiobook, where you go over step 1 and then you do your workbook and then you sort of see what happens and then you come back. So it almost feels like this last chapter 9, applying the contents of this book. It's like, now that you've done all of the things and you pinpointed psychological safety, think about sustainability. Because for me, when I read a book, I read the whole book and they're like, all right, now I got to do all the things in this book. That's a lot. But this definitely is not a book where you really probably should read it real quick, then go back and just do step 1, just do step 2, just do step 3, and then kind of come back and reflect on what happened and then go on to the next one. It's very, like, we talked about it being a doing book, but I think now that we're sort of talking about the order, you're really going to get more out of it if you do what it says and then come back to it rather than read it and then try to do it and then try to come back.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, the week 1 plan is don't do anything, which is kind of funny. Like, slow down and don't be the overactive thinker and all those examples he gave of like, slow down.
Yeah.
The revolutionary thinker.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I have so many good ideas that never come to fruition.
You pinpoint and watch, and then you have that, and then you use that to decide maybe my pinpoint was bad. You can come back and kind of cycle through. Certainly don't create your sustainability plan. And he talked about some good ideas of gamifying. I know Kim Heald talked about some kind of gamifying supervision type tasks where you can use the steps and you can use this, and people who engage in these steps and have plans around these steps for their own development, can move up in the organization better. But again, you probably don't want to create that until you have modeled how to do it to everyone. Yeah. Otherwise, it just becomes, everyone, you need to use this plan. I haven't used it and I don't know how to use it. And I probably won't use it, but you should use, so you do have to sort of come back to that last chapter about how do you keep doing this once you've had a chance to practice it, which again, I think we talked about how as a book, it is very hard to have this narrative that goes from point A to point F, whatever it is, when this process is so intertwined with so many of the same behaviors with slightly different terms or at slightly different points, or the same behavior presented at different times within the process. So yeah, it's going to be hard to do some of the things without it. I didn't really need some of the last sections of the Venn diagrams on like self-management, relationship management before. I kind of felt like maybe it should have just focused on the sustainability piece and then go back and start this whole process again. That I think would have been to me, better ending. And I think solved some of the issues that I know I had coming into this episode that we've sort of worked through over the past 2 hours.
Not that these aren't important points, but more they're just, could be their own entire book.
Yeah.
Right.
Oof.
Great.
All right.
You worked through some stuff, Rob?
I did. I feel much better. I didn't do the 5-step process, but in the end, it was the 5 steps I met along the way that really was about the journey.
And all he's going to think about in his next consultation presentation is head nods.
Yeah, I know. Look, I'll be like, who's vigorously nodding their heads?
All right, wrapping it up. So I like to always do a last line thing. I'm just going to kind of paraphrase. There was sort of the end. It kind of ended with, if you remember one thing, which really focused on, it's page 207. It did not say, if you only remember one thing. I think you should try to remember at least 5 things, according to Ron Austin. But if I had to say, remember one thing after reading this book, it would be, quote, having dialogue with people and asking the right questions to understand the causes of their behavior before reacting to address any concerns, end quote. I think that captures a lot of what you're going to be doing throughout the 5-step process. And while it does not take the place of the 5-step process, if you're not doing that, you can't really do an effective 5-step process for anyone other than yourself. And then I didn't write down the last line. It was sort of like a, let me know how it goes kind of, which, okay. Sounds good.
Dear John Austen.
Let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah.
The end.
Yeah, I mean, I think what came up throughout the book is these are all great steps and strategies, but they're not going to work if you don't have a relationship established with your employees and a culture in which people feel safe to share how their work experience is actually going.
Yeah.
So you have to have those pieces in place if you actually want to produce meaningful change that feels good to your employees.
Yeah.
Well, I think any final thoughts before we wrap up our results book club?
Oops, I just did mine.
You just did yours. Any other final thoughts, I should say? That's sorry. I was something popped in my head. I wasn't listening as close as I should have. Apologies.
Diana hit her final thought. Hit my final thought. That I think it's not linear, right? It's cyclical, and you can do some things before the other. You don't have to do everything in the exact same way that are as described. But you can, right? But it might be more complicated than that in some situations.
Yeah, I think he starts off in the book with the point of like, you can't just tell people.
Right.
And they can't just they can understand and you can tell them, but that's not enough. And that's why you should engage in these processes. And I think that's an excellent framework to think about why you would want to do this. Telling people to do something is not enough. And in fact, often is a way to make sure it doesn't get done and is no longer a priority for them, depending on the type of person you're dealing with. So yeah, that, and then something I think Diana had stepped away for, the performance diagnostic checklist is the most awesome thing ever. And I love that it was in this book.
Nice. Well,
everybody, we hope you enjoyed our results book club and hope you had a fabulous Supervision September with us. I know I entered this recording ready to be a little saucy at Dr. Austen and his book, but I had I actually like it a lot more now that we've had this discussion. I don't know if we've ever had a book club. We always have fun in the book club, but I don't think I've ever had one where I was like, you know what? I think I kind of like this book now based on the conversation I had with y'all after we were all done reading it and then talking about it. So, hopefully you found our conversation enlightening. If you haven't read the book, it was free. You can get the audio book. Maybe you will find the same way that it's got some new things in it. A lot of things you may already know. Maybe you've never heard these before. It's a great kind of primer in that regard. And you may also find talking about it afterwards. It's a doing book after all. It really makes it a little more of a fun read in that regard. Who knows? But we want to thank you for listening to ABA Inside Track. If you also then say, man, those book clubs, what a ton of fun. I can't wait to listen to more of them. And you're not subscribed at patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Well, you can head on over there because you're going to get more book clubs, all the book clubs we do. You're going to get 2 CEs. This is a Supervision CE. They won't always be for no additional charge. As a thank you for subscribing, as well as access to things like voting. We usually do voting on our book club. So if you said, I would have chosen a different Supervision book, well, guess what? That could be a way. We actually chose this one on our own, but we usually do voting. So again, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And also you probably want the second secret code word, which is papaya, Papaya. It's a fruit. Delicious. You get a papaya guava juice. Remember those? Those are good. You get those sometimes. Some final thanks. Certainly thank you to Diana and Jackie and Alan for being here. Thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro-outro music, Kyle Sturia for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his fabulous editing work. We'll be back next week with not a book club, but a regular fun-filled episode, not about supervision. Oh well, time to move on. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.